Hi, I'm Brad Peebler and welcome to Animate 2. Hopefully you've already seen Animate 1, so you've got a basis for simple keyframing and some of the general controls inside of LightWave 3D for creating animation. Well, this tape we're going to take it a step further and look at some of the deeper tools inside of LightWave 3D for animation, including expressions, deformers, and some high-end parenting controls. We're going to take this as a project-based approach, so we're going to do several little animations that will show you lots of different things inside of LightWave. Let's go ahead and get started. In this project, we're going to be covering a spaceship flyby. It's a pretty straightforward animation of the actual ship, but we're going to be adding some expressions to do camera shake. We're going to use a channel modifier, and we're going to be using a tool called Align to Path. Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we'll start by loading up our hero object, which is our spaceship. So we'll go ahead and use the plus key to add an object. Go into Space, Fighter, and just choose the F_body. Alright, the object is loaded, and we can see here, if we roll our viewport around a little bit, you can see it's actually flying away from the camera. That's okay for now. Let's go into the camera's perspective, using the 6 key on our keyboard, and choose the camera and just move it up a little bit. I like to get my camera off the ground plane, and we'll just move it back a little like this, and we'll create a key for it. Okay, now I'm going to choose my object, and I can do that by clicking on it, or choosing objects in the bottom left, or of course using Shift-O as we discussed earlier. Now I'm going to go ahead and move the spaceship forward this way, off into space, and we're going to move it up on the Y-axis. Again, I'm just using left mouse and right mouse controls. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I want this animation to be about 120 frames, so I'm going to go ahead and change my last preview frame here to 120. Just set that right down here in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And we'll go ahead and go to frame 60. And we're going to move the object down and over about to here. Now what you'll see is there's no motion path yet because I haven't created a key. So if I use the Create Key tool, that will add the key in here. Now what we're going to show you right now is another tool you can activate so that LightWave will always create keys for you automatically. If I go to the Display tab, then go over to my General Options, in the middle of that palette you'll see there's an option for Auto Key Create. We're going to go ahead and choose Modified Channels. This will create a keyframe for any channel that I modify as I'm working. Alright, so now what you'll notice is if I go to frame, let's say 90, where I want the ship to fly by, and drag it forward, you'll notice there's already a keyframe has been created, and we can see the motion path behind it. And that updates in real time as I move the ship. Okay, now, you might say to yourself, Self, he's creating that motion path with the spaceship backwards. And playing it backward looks pretty cool because it flies away, but playing it forward, it's flying backwards. Well, this is where the tool called Align to Path comes in. If we go to our Items tab, you'll see on the bottom left of our palette here, there is an option for Motion Options. If I click on that, that brings up the controls for the ship. And you can see it's actually the motion options for F_body. That's our object, so we're all good there. Now under Controllers and Limits, if I go here, you can see that Heading, Pitch, and Bank have controller pop-ups. And in this case, it's set to keyframes on all three. That means that keyframes are controlling the heading, pitch, and bank of those controls. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change my heading controller to Align to Path. And you can see immediately now the spaceship is actually changing its heading automatically to match the path. I can also change the pitch controller to Align to Path. And this way, you'll see the ship comes along and orients perfectly to the curve. And we get that nice looking motion path. Alright, now if I just push play and watch this, you can see it playing along here. And it's pretty nice looking, but what I want to do is I actually want it to bank into the curve. Now, you'll notice under bank there is no Align to Path option. That's because it doesn't know what direction the bank is to the curve. Alright, it can do heading and pitch, but it can't automatically calculate bank. That's fine because I want to manually bank it into the curve like this. So that as it comes in, it banks and makes a nice swoosh by the camera. Okay, now I'm going to push play and we can see here it's flying along. Now it's a little bit too rigid on the path. So, and it's also, you can see, not playing back in real time. As we learned on tape 1 of Animate, if we go to our Options panel, which is the O key, or again, Display and choosing the options, there's a tool called Play at Exact Rate. And we want to make sure that we've got that activated so that it's actually playing exactly at 30 frames per second. Okay, so that's on. We're all set there. Now I want to go back to my motion options. So we go back to our Items tab, Motion Options, and we'll go to the first tab here, IK and Modifiers. And you'll see at the top there is an Align to Path Look Ahead, and that's set at 0.033 seconds. Well, because I'm doing 30 frames per second NTSC, that's exactly 1 frame, which means the spaceship is reading the frame ahead of its current position to see where it should be targeting. If I turn this up, you can see the nose of the ship starts to change. Okay, and in fact, if I go too far, it'll flip backwards. You can see like this. So by changing that to a higher number, you'll notice that now instead of waiting until it gets in the curve to turn, it starts turning its pitch before it gets there. So watch here, if we go ahead and play, you'll see it start to actually anticipate the curve. Again, we can crank that up as high as we want, and you can see it's actually already now curved through. Again, if we want to go to our perspective view and take a look at that, you can actually see, we'll go ahead and turn on Center Current Item. We'll rotate it around, and you can see its pitch changing right here. It's already anticipating that curve, and it gives that nice sensation of anticipation. Again, if we come in here, you can see how it's actually turning away from the curve because it's looking ahead clear up to here on this path. If we decrease the number, you can see it's actually changing where it's pointing at on the path. And that's working for heading and pitch. Okay, once we get that set just right, we go ahead and push play. And there it goes. All right, so we've got our spaceship coming from way off in the distance and then whipping by the camera. Now the next thing we want to do is actually add something in the background. So we've got a planet and some stars. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, we're just going to go to our Add Item. We're going to Load Object. We'll go back to the base space directory. And let's just go ahead and add random stars. And as we discussed in tape 1 of Animate, my grid size is now huge, so my clipping plane has made it so I can't see my spaceship. To fix that, again, we're going to use the open bracket key to reduce the size of the grid back down to a reasonable amount, and now I got my spaceship back into range. All right. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add a planet. So again, Load Object, Solar System. Let's go with Saturn. Be kind of nice with the rings. There's our Saturn. You can see the ring. We're right in the middle of the planet right now. Let's go ahead and move the planet out there. Now, we can just move this straight back. We'll just set it back past the motion path. And we'll move it down a little bit. Now you notice that because I have Auto Key Create turned on, and I'm on a non-zero keyframe, I'm actually creating a motion path for the planet. And you see if I scrub through here, now I've got my planet flying away from the camera. That's not what we want at all. No problem. Simply go to the keyframe where the planet is where you want it, and we copy that to 0 just like we did in tape 1. We hit Enter, 0. That's going to create a keyframe with these key values at time 0. And you can see now the motion path is gone because it's static in that position. And here we can see our spaceship flying by. Now just to reduce any possible problems, I'm going to go ahead and go to keyframe 83 for the planet and delete it, because we certainly don't need that planet to be accidentally animated at any point. And to make it a little more interesting, I'm going to use my rotate tool, and we'll just rotate it kind of like this. Got a nice perspective on it there. And now you can see we've got our spaceship flying by. Okay. Now what we want to do is actually create some camera shake. So as the spaceship flies by the camera, the jet thrust off the back of the spaceship causes the camera to shake. And to do that, we could create many, many keyframes for the camera, but I'm going to show you a way to do it automatically. To do that, we're going to employ a channel modifier called Noisy Channel, and we're going to use expressions. So before we do that, let's go ahead and save our scene. We'll go ahead and save our scene here. We'll just call it Space Flyby 01. Okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and clear the scene because we're going to talk briefly about expressions. And I know that a lot of times when people hear about expressions, they get nervous because they think, oh no, expressions means math, expressions are hard, it's going to be difficult to figure this out. So I'm going to show you a very basic example of a couple expressions so that you get the idea that actually expressions are very simple to use if you just understand a couple rules and some syntax. Let's go ahead and take a look here. To get to the expressions interface, we need to open the graph editor. So we're going to start by just loading up an object here. And we'll back out to our base directory. Let's just bring in the cow. All right, there's our cow object. We can rotate around a little bit here so we can see him. All right, now I'm going to go into the graph editor here. And in the graph editor, there's a tab labeled Expressions. Okay, it's very straightforward. Under the Expressions tab, there's a button that's labeled New. So all we need to do is type in a name for the expression. Now this time, I'm just going to call this Move the Cow. All right, this name means nothing. This is just for your own personal use. All right. Now in the value field, this is always going to return to LightWave some numeric value. So what you need to do is put something in here that LightWave will understand. In this case, I'm just going to put something really simple. How about 5? All right. So what this means is the expression called move the cow will always return to LightWave a value of 5. So if I apply that to the cow's x, you can see the cow's x position here. If I choose apply, because that's selected, it will apply a value 5 to cow's position x. That's all there is to expressions. This field here creates a number. That number is then assigned to any channel that is locked to that expression. Okay? It doesn't get any easier than that. Very, very simple. Now you'll notice because this just says value here of 5, that if I move the cow, you see I move him on X, you'll see this little key tick that stays in place right here. Well, if I go and move it, I can move it manually here this way, but as soon as I advance a frame, the expression takes over and locks it right back down to that. Okay? So if you want this to be additive to your current keyframe position, what you can do is you type in the word value here. So let's say value plus and then the number we want to add. And we hit enter, and that changes the expression. So now, instead of it hard locking the x position of the cow always to 5, it's going to look at the cow's position and then add 5 to it. So if I move the cow here to say 1 meter, actually I guess that's, yeah, about 1 meter on the x here, and then I create a key for it, you'll see that if I step forward and come back, it is actually, the expression has now added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meters, and the cow's resulting x position is 6. All right, that's because the expression here is the value, which we started off, and I manually set as 1 on the keyframe position. It added 5, and now I have a value of 6. Okay, so that's the very, very basic example of expressions. Now, what you can also do, besides having value, is you can reference other items' channels. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove that expression from the cow. We're going to reset its position. And now what I want to do, I'm going to take the light here. We're going to move the light forward a little bit on the z-axis. And what I want to do is I want the cow's x position always to be the same as the light's x position. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go down to the channel bin here and choose the light's position x. And the reason I bring that up here is just so I can read its syntax. So what I'm going to do under value now, in my expressions editor window, I'm going to come down here and I'm actually going to choose value. I'm going to turn that into open bracket light.position.x. All right, so I just typed in exactly what I see over here, and I put it inside of brackets. By putting it inside of brackets, that tells LightWave this is a channel. So when it looks inside brackets, it scans all of its channel repository until it finds light.positionx, and now it's going to return that value for the expression. Now go back to my cow here. We'll bring the cow up, cow's channels. You see I've got my position x chosen, and I'm going to apply this expression to the cow. And now you can see the cow's x position has been matched exactly to the light's x position. So if I move the light, you can see the cow is always locked to it. All right? Now this is not exactly like parenting, because if I move it on Z or Y, the cow doesn't follow. The cow sits still. But as soon as I move it on X, the cow's all over it. All right? He's not letting that light get away. Now, like I said before, you can see here this is set up as move the cow, and I've been moving the cow. Well, the name really means nothing at all. I could apply that same expression to the camera. I also don't have to apply it only to light channels. In other words, just because I'm moving the light on X doesn't mean that has to affect the cow's X. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can apply that same expression to lots of different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that same expression, and I'm also going to link it to the cow's position on Z. So we'll say apply. And while I'm at it, I'm going to choose the camera's channels, and I'm going to apply the same expression to the camera's Y position. So I choose the camera, hit apply. Now watch as I move the light, I'm changing the camera, which we can see here. I'm changing the cow's X and Z, or X and Z, yes, X and Z position, as we're moving it along there. And I'm moving all these things just by changing the X position of the light. All right, now if we want to see the expression, you'll notice in the Expressions tab here, you'll see that it shows me the expression, it shows me the name of the expression. I've got a flag that I can turn it on or off. If I disable it, you can see now I can move the light and nothing happens. If I re-enable it, everything snaps back. All right. Also, you'll notice over here where it says attached are 3. That means there are 3 things, 3 channels using that expression. If I double click on this expression, up here in the top you'll see I have now those 3 channels listed, so I can see exactly what's being affected by that expression. Okay, let's go ahead and bring back our old scene of the spaceship flyby, and I'm going to show how we can use a channel modifier in combination with expressions to fade that modifier in and out. It's a pretty cool technique. Let's check it out. So we're going to go ahead and load back in our little scene file we created earlier. And we'll say load scene. There she is. And we'll bring in all our textures. There we go. Okay, so there we have our little spaceship here flying by. And what we want to have happen is we want the camera to shake as the spaceship flies by. So if I choose the camera here and I go into the graph editor, we have a tool on the tab here called modifiers. And these modifiers allow us to do all kinds of things sort of automatically. If we come in here, you can see lots of different ones. The one we're interested in is noisy channel. All right, right now, I'm going to choose camera's position Y, and I'm going to apply noisy channel. All right, now, if we double click on it, it opens up this little interface right here on the graph editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and push play, and you can see all of a sudden the camera's kind of jumping around. If we change the scale a little bit, let's just crank it up. You see the more I change the scale, the more the camera moves. Now, there's no way to envelope or to animate these values. You can see here I can just set that, and that's it. So this isn't good because I don't want the camera to start shaking until the spaceship gets right about here. All right, so once the spaceship gets to about frame 70, I want the shaking to start, get really severe, and then die back down. Right now, by just applying that modifier to the camera, it's on, and that's it. So here come the use of expressions. Let's go ahead and remove the modifier from the list, and we're going to add in something called a null object. We go add objects, add null, and we're going to call this shaky null. And we need to spell that right, so we'll add an A into our shaky null. There we go. All right, you see the null object here at the base of our scene. It's just a simple little object. It won't render in the scene. It's just a little jack. All right, it just sits there, and we can use this for all kinds of creative things. You can see there it is. Now in this case, I'm going to shake this null object all over the place. So to do that, we go to our graph editor, and we're going to shake it on its y-axis. So again, we use noisy channel. And if we push play, you can see there it is in the middle of our scene, kind of shaking along. All right. Also, if we zoom in a little bit to our graph editor here, you can see the solid line represents the keyframe data, which is just a straight line because there is no motion. And then on top of that, we zoom in here a little bit more, you can see is the modifier data. That dotted line is created by the noisy channel. So if you want to update that, let's say we want to increase the scale. Okay, you can see that makes the curve of the shaky channel much larger. If you increase the speed a little bit. All right. So now we've got our little shaky null going crazy there. The next thing we're going to do is add another null, and this one's going to be called shaky fade. And this shaky fade is going to be the control item that will control the amount of shake that happens in our scene. All right, and this is where the expression comes in. So we go to our graph editor, and we go to our expressions tab, and we call this shaky cam. And we know we want to leave the camera's original position alone. So just like we did earlier, we'll leave in that value there. That means it'll take in the initial value from the channel, and then it's going to add in, so we say plus, and inside there we say brackets, and we want to use the shaky null's Y position, because that's the one that has the modifier on it. All right, so we come in here and we say, okay, value plus open bracket shaky null dot position dot Y. All right, now if I just left it at that, it would have the camera's original position, and then it would just shake it all the time. All right, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to say times the value of the shaky fader. So we say times shaky fade dot scale dot x. All right, say OK. And now we're going to go ahead and add that to the camera. And we'll just add it to the camera's Y position. We'll say apply. All right, now let's go ahead and close our graph add there. And what you see is right now we have a little bit of shake. The reason we have some shake is because if we look at shaky fade, if we look at its scale value on X right now, it's set to 1. We'll set that down to 0. And now if we push play, you see the camera is no longer shaking. Now what's going on there? What we have is the null object that's shaking is adding a value into the expression. That value is being multiplied times the size of the X scale of the shaky null fader. And so what's happening is when that shaky null fader is scaled down to 0, 0 multiplied times any number is always 0. Thus, the resulting value that gets added back to Y is 0 and doesn't affect the camera's position at all. So now what we have to do, as we want more shake added into the camera's position, we simply scale up that null on X, and that will consistently add more noise to the shake. All right, let's take a look here. So we come back here. Like I said before, we want it to start shaking right around 70. So first of all, we'll go ahead and create a keyframe at 50 so it's not shaking at all. Okay, so it's going to maintain a no shake zone there. Now we're going to go to frame, let's say 70, and we're going to scale that up to about, let's say 0.2, so a quarter of its total shake at frame 70. And now you can see it's starting to shake. So now at frame 90, or actually about 85, it should be at maximum shake. So let's set that at about 1.5. So that's a massive shake there. Okay, what you'll notice now if I start to scroll back is that not only is the camera shaking a little bit as we move into it, it's also moving up on the y-axis. The reason for this is because the shaky null object, if we look at it from the side view here, you can see I had moved the shaky null object up on y at the very beginning so we can see it. So you can see the beginning shaky null value is about 7 meters tall. All right, if we just set that back to 0 and create a keyframe for it at frame 0, now the shaking will always occur at 0, so the only additive value I get is just the amount of shake that's added to that null and not the position that I had actually manually added in there. If we go back into our camera's position now, you'll see that as it comes in, the camera starts to shake, really starts to shake, and then we can fade that back down by taking our shaky null fader and stretching it back down to 0 at frame 120. And let's go ahead and make our animation about 130 frames long so you can see at the end how that's standing still. All right, and we push play, And you can see the spaceship comes in, starts to shake, and then it goes by. The camera really shakes violently, and then relaxes. And again, if we take a look in our graph editor, at the camera, let's just go into camera's position here. Notice you can see, if we look at the graph itself, you can see the shakiness here. It starts off, no shake, and then the shaking occurs, gets really violent, and then fades back down. And again, we've just done that using an expression tied to those nulls, and using one null to multiply times the other, so we can fade it in and out. Let's go ahead and take a look at this rendered. You can see now we've actually added some motion blur using multi-step rendering in LightWave 3D. And you see as it comes in, that violent shake gives you the nice illusion of speed as that spaceship rips by you. So far, all the projects we've worked with have been rigid objects, which means we're moving the entire object or rotating the entire object in space. We can also deform objects by basically moving each individual point in the object or certain groups of points in the object over time. One of the ways we can do that is with a tool called endomorphs. So in this project, we're going to take a look at how we can use endomorphs to animate some butterflies. And we're also going to use the spreadsheet editor to change some of the timing on those butterflies. So let's go ahead and take a look here. First thing we need to do is bring in our butterfly object. So we'll go into Load Object here. And if we go into the Animals directory, there is an object called Butterfly. Okay, there it is. Now, right now we've got it in layout. What we need to do, though, is we need to add what we call endomorphs. So to do that, we'll go into the modeler, hit the F12 key, and we'll hit the A key, which will auto-fit the butterfly into the viewport. All right, now we're going to have to make some modifications to this model, and if you haven't had a chance to get some experience with the modeler or take a look at Model 1 or Model 2, we're just going to step you through this very quickly without a lot of explanation, so please follow along as best you can. The first thing we want to do is create a new morph map, which is what we call an endomorph. At the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the M button here, and under the pop-up, we can say New. And in this case, we're going to call it Wings dot up, and we say OK. Now what we want to do is we want to raise the wings up into a flap up position. Since this object is symmetrical, we will turn on a mode called symmetry. You'll find that in the bottom of your screen here. Activate symmetry. Choose the point select mode. We can just use the lasso select here to select all these points on this side of the wing, and doing that by using my right mouse key. And there's one other point right here that we want to get. So you can see I've just selected all the points on one side, and symmetry mode automatically selected them on the other. Now if I use my rotate tool, which is under Modify, Rotate, and go to the side view here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the bottom next to symmetry. There's a mode button, and I'm going to choose on that mode an action center of origin. What that means is no matter where I click on the screen, the tool is going to be acted around the origin. So if I click here, it's going to rotate it around the center of the object, which is great. So we're just going to flap the wings up about like that. Okay, so there I have the up flap of the wings. I'm going to go back down to my bottom right-hand corner of my screen, go to Morph, New, Wings, dot, down. And now I'm going to rotate that back over and down this way. All right, so now I have two morph maps. I've got my original base, which is here. It's my flat butterfly. I've got wings down, and I've got wings up. And those are embedded in the object as endomorphs. So again, we've basically just baked in some information about how to animate this object into the model file. Let's go ahead and save it as a new name. We'll call this, say, save object as, call it butterfly underscore flap. And we say save. And now I've got a new model file. We're going to go back over to layout here. Let's just hit minus on your keyboard to clear that out. Hit plus and load in the butterfly flap. You'll notice at first glance it appears to be exactly like the original object. But if we go into the Object's Properties panel, which we can get to from this little blue button at the bottom of the screen here, or hitting the P key on your keyboard, that will bring up any item's properties. You'll see under Deformations, this tab here, there's a displacement pop-up. And we want to choose a tool called Morph Mixer. Morph Mixer is what allows us to mix between the different endomorphs. If I double click on that listing, it brings open my Morph Mixer sliders. And we'll go ahead and roll this around a little bit so we get a nice perspective view. You can see that if I use the down slider, it flaps the wing down. If I move the up slider, it flaps the wings up. Okay, so if I want to make that guy flap, I can have it going up, and then when it comes back down, I can blend that one over. All right, so what you can see is if I want to have one quick flap, let's say we want them to start off up, and then over 10 frames we want those to go all the way to the down position, we simply click and drag this, and then drag these up. And now you can see I've got one little flap there. All right, now you can see if I continue to work with this, I'm actually going to have to animate both curves together. All right, so now I've got one continuous flap, just like this. Now if I click on the graph editor here, you'll see it opens up, and it brings in, I'm going to go ahead and close my Morph Mixer palette because I can now just work directly with the curves. It brings in both channels. All right, so you can see there's the wings up envelope going from 0 to 100 and back down. And at the same time, the wings up are going from 100 to 0 back to 100. And so you can see as I scroll through my time slider here, the wings flapping down and flapping back up, and the graph showing that visually. So what we want to do is select both channels. And if we go to the expanded view of our graph editor here, we'll click on the little button in the bottom right-hand corner. Under Curves, Post Behavior of Repeat. All right, and now you can see I've got my wing flapping repeating. What you'll notice, though, is if we look at this keyframe here where it repeats, it's sort of a harsh curve. So we learned in Animate 1 is we can fix those harsh joints by using Ease In, Ease Out. Now you can see that flapping right through. And if we push the play button, you can see there we have our wing flap going nicely. Now this is not quite as fast as a butterfly would actually flap its wings. Luckily for us, we can come in here and we can shift double click. That's going to select all the keyframes. Choose the stretch tool. Previously we were always working by just moving points in time. We can actually stretch them. So I'm going to choose the stretch tool here. I'm going to put my cursor right on the 0 keyframe, and I'm going to hold down the control key. By holding down the control key, rather than stretching the values, I can stretch the times. And I can just keep stretching that until I get a nice flap like such. So now I've got a nice 10-frame flap, and you can see that looks a lot better for our little butterfly wing flap. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of Y motion on the butterfly as the wing flaps down. So to do that, I'm going to go over to my channel bin here, and what I can do is I can right-click on the down wings flap channel. And inside there you'll see a copy. We'll say copy, and that copies the value of those keyframes. Now I'm going to go to the butterfly's Y position here and just simply double-click on it. That brings it up into the channel bin. Now I right-click on that and I say paste. Now what you'll notice is the butterfly is jumping up and down drastically. The reason being, when I copied that channel, what I had in the wing flap was a value of 100%. Because the morph went from 0 to 100, when I copy that, instead of taking 100%, it has to put it into the form of meters because I'm pasting it on a Y channel, which is a meter measurement. So it's just now moved the butterfly from 0 to 1 full meter. Okay, 100% equals 1 meter. So what I need to do is just simply scale that value back down so that I have a very tiny bouncing of the butterfly as the wings flap. So we simply come in here. I right-click and drag out on the keyframe. You can see if I hit the play button again, it's going all kinds of crazy. So I'll change my value here. Let's just try 0.1. You can see that's still way too strong. So we'll say 0.01. And that's a little better. You can see our little butterfly flapping along there. Maybe that's still a little bit too strong. So we'll just tell it 0.005, cut that in half, and I'm pretty happy with that. My little butterfly is flapping along and his body's moving up and down with the wings. Okay, the next thing we need to do is actually have this little guy fly around a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do here, let's actually make sure we have repeat set on. That's good. Everything's all fine right now. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and close our graph editor, and we're going to start to animate the butterfly. Let's go into the camera's perspective, And we're going to move the camera a little bit. Again, I like to get it up off the ground plane. And we're going to take the object there, and we're going to rotate it a little bit, like this, so we can kind of see it. And now I'm going to move it along this way. All right, we're going to start right there, and we're going to move it along. And I'm going to show you something. We're going to create a little problem right now. Okay? Now watch what happens as it flies along here. See it moving along. You'll notice that the looping has a problem now. The body, once it gets past here, doesn't properly bounce up and down with the wings. Okay, let's slow it down so you can see that. You see it's actually moving up with the wing flapping down, then it comes back down, but now it's not doing its appropriate loop. Why is that? Let's go back and look at the graph editor. Let's take a look at the X, Y, and Z channels. You can see on the X channel, I just moved it with 2 keyframes from 0 to a little less than a meter here. But on the Y channel, remember earlier we had created that looping motion. All right? So if we see here, here's our original looping motion, but I just created another keyframe out here at frame 30. And what that's done is it's broken my loop, because now it's still repeating, but now it's repeating with that extra duration in there. So what I need to do is delete that. Okay? Now the problem is, I actually want to be able to move my butterfly around on the y-axis. But now I want to also have it looping so it's always bouncing. So how do I deal with that? What I need essentially is 2 y-axes for this butterfly. One to move it around freely, and the other one that's just constantly bobbing up and down. How do I do that? Null objects. Null objects are your friends. It basically gives you an extra coordinate system. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go back to my frame 30, and I'm going to delete that keyframe. All right, we're going to go back, and then we've got our little butterfly going along again. Looks good. So he's just sitting there. That's great. Okay. And in fact, we're going to move him back to the 0 position, and we're going to rotate, reset his rotation. So we're now back exactly where we were, where he's just doing his flappy thing, and everybody's happy. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a null object, and we're going to call this butterfly mover. Okay? Now remember, in tape 1 we talked about parenting. So I'm going to show you another mechanism for parenting. We're going to go into the schematic view window. And you can see here's our butterfly mover. And here's our butterfly itself, the butterfly called flap. If I select the butterfly flap, hold down the control key on my keyboard, and click on the mover, it is now parented to the mover. If I go into my camera view and I choose the butterfly mover, I can rotate it, I can move it, I can move it anywhere I want, I can make it go up, over here, I can make it go off in the distance a little bit. Let's just change the duration of the animation here, make it 120. Let's just kind of fly that guy off like this. Again, I can change the y-axis with impunity. No problem, because I now have, in fact I can rotate him, can do whatever I want, and you can see it has not changed the looping motion of the body. So the body continues to bob up and down as my little butterfly flips his wings and flies off into the distance. Not too bad. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to add a couple more butterflies to the scene. So how do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and use a tool called Modify. Modify is very cool. It's a way to do keyframe management. Now what you'll notice is Modify is actually sort of hidden inside of LightWave. It's a generic plugin. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to add that to a keyboard equivalent, because I use it all the time. If we go to our layout pop-up over here in the top left-hand corner, go down to Interface, Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, and then we'll choose inside this list here the plugins pop down, and we'll scroll down to where we see TMP Modify Delete Motion. It's actually called Modify. And we're going to go ahead and go down to our Shift D. If I select this here and I say Assign, I've just assigned Modify to Shift D. So we'll say Done there. Okay, so I've got my little butterfly flipping around here, but I actually don't want to have any motion on that at all right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift D, brings up Modify, and I'm going to tell it to clear the motion, but protect frame 0. And I say OK. And now you'll see it's completely deleted my motion path. All the keyframes, everything there is all gone except for my keyframe 0. Now I'm going to go ahead and reset this on move and reset this on rotate so that it's back to its 0 axis. And now I'm going to save this scene as butterfly rig _01. Okay, so I've got a scene now called butterfly rig 01. All is good. I'm happy. Now what I want to do here is go ahead and animate this character. So again, I'm going to rotate him. We'll just do the same thing we did moments ago. Just sort of move it over a little bit like this. And down a little. Just going to rotate and move. Just kind of do whatever you want here with your motion path. Just have fun. Okay, there we go. So we can see there's our little butterfly happily moving along. He moves a little quickly there, but that's okay. All right, now we want our more butterflies. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say File, Load from Scene. And I'm going to choose my butterfly rig 01 scene that I just saved moments ago. It says load lights from scene as well as objects. No, I've got my own lights already set up in the scene. And now you'll see I've got 2 copies of the butterfly. Now one thing I don't like is that they're both flapping their wings at exactly the same rate and exactly the same time. It looks unnatural. So if I go into the spreadsheet editor and show you how the spreadsheet editor can be set up as what we call a dope sheet. All right, you can see the spreadsheet editor here right now. It's got some different properties here. If we look down at the bottom here of the spreadsheet, you can see there's a little arrow. If we click on that arrow, that's going to collapse that window. Right? That's the attributes window. I don't want the attributes, so I collapse it. What I want is the dope sheet. That's the little arrow in the bottom right-hand corner. If I pop that open, you can see the dope sheet for my characters. And you can see here, I've got the butterfly flap 2, and there is keyframes. Now if I click on the plus here to expand that out, you can see all the various channels that are animated. I'm going to go ahead and scale the window down here so we can zoom in and see that a little more clearly. We just move this over here. You can also click on these guys here to scale them a little bit, and I can use this to zoom in and out. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the channels that represent this character, which is the position Y and the wings up and down. Okay. Now if I just click and drag this, I can actually change the timing of the wing flap. If I just move this over a little bit, you can see now the wing flapping is slightly different from one to the next. Okay. I can also change the scale of it. So if I drag these out like this, you'll see now the second butterfly has a really slow swing compared to the first one. All right, so we'll go ahead and just scale that back down a little bit, apply that, and close it. And you can see we've got 2 very different looking flaps. All right, now we'll take the flap mover 2, and we'll animate that guy. So we'll just rotate him around a little bit like this, move him off in the distance, and do exactly what we did with the first butterfly. Just sort of randomly move him around. Happy days for the monarch. Okay, now we have a couple butterflies flying around here. Now another thing we might want to do, of course, is track one of the butterflies with the camera. So we'll go ahead and bring our camera here. Let's just say we want to rotate the camera. So I use Y on the keyboard or choose rotate over here. And we're just going to rotate over. And we're just going to follow that guy right there. So we'll rotate it this way a little bit. And then when he flies up, let's sort of rotate it up. And then continue to follow him this way. And now you can see we have our 2 butterflies flying and the camera moving along. Now if we want to get a better idea that the camera's moving, it's actually a good idea to have something in the background as reference. So instead of setting up an entire scene, we're just going to use SkyTracer so that your scene file has something a little more interesting. SkyTracer is a real easy way to create a nice background sky environment full of clouds and a nice sunrise or sunset, whichever you like. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we do that real quick. Of course, if you want to, you can go ahead and add more butterflies. Now that you know the process, it's simply iterative. So we're going to go ahead and go to SkyTracer. So under the Scene tab, go to the backdrop under Effects here, Add Environment, choose SkyTracer 2. Double-click on that, and that opens up our SkyTracer panel. You can go ahead and close the other palette, and open up Viper, which is over here on the left. That's our Versatile Interactive Preview Renderer. See, as soon as I activate that, I can see the nice sky in the background and, of course, the ground plane that gets drawn in. What we want to do is we want to add some clouds. So we go to Clouds, Enable. You see that draws the clouds in. And you can see right now it's sort of a early morning time. You can see the clouds are a little bit dark. So we'll go under Suns, choose Sun's Positions, and let's just change it to about 1400 hours, which is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that gives us a nice sky background in the environment there. All right. Another thing we can do is we can move our camera. So let's just go to our camera here. And this is a good trick, actually. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to minimize these windows. So we're not closing SkyTracer, we're just minimizing it. What I want to do is I want to move the camera down on the y-axis, but I want to move it the entire path. So instead of moving each keyframe down, I go to Items, and there's a tool called Move Path. So I can simply click that, use my right mouse key to drag it down, and you can see now I have moved the entire path. All right, the next thing I want to do, let's just move it down a little bit further, and then we can use the Rotate key to rotate back up. I'm using my Shift arrows to go through the different keyframes, just to kind of rotate these over to make sure we're looking upward. And now we've got a lower motion path. All right. And that way, when we're inside of SkyTracer here, if we re-render, you can see we're looking up a little bit more towards the top of the sky as opposed to seeing more of the horizon. Now, you can tell that it actually takes a few seconds to render SkyTracer. So what we're going to do, rather than re-render SkyTracer in the background every time, is we're going to go ahead and bake the sky, which creates a sky environment image that can be rendered in mere seconds. So let's go ahead and see how we would set that up. At the top of our SkyTracer palette here, you'll see Sky Baker. Simply click on that. We'll go ahead and leave our resolution at 512. Type in a name of Butterfly Sky. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory for it. We'll call this SkyDir. We'll say Save. Let's choose JPEG as our format of choice. You can choose it whatever you like, actually. I happen to like JPEG. And go ahead and leave mapping on set to cube. Now go ahead and say OK. And now it's going to take a couple minutes to render this out. So now's a good time to go grab a sandwich. What we're going to do is we're going to push pause, and then we'll be back with a nicely baked sky. OK, so Sky Baker has finished baking our sky rendered environment. And what you'll see on the interface now is a message that tells us that it has actually created a LightWave object and a LightWave sky in our content directory. And do we want to add these to the current scene? We'll say yes, and it's actually going to bring in now that object that it just created. Let's go ahead and close that window there, close SkyTracer, and you can see now inside of OpenGL I've actually got a nice real-time sky environment. And you notice my camera moves, I can see the sky in the background. Now a couple things I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to go to my Scene tab here, and in my backdrop, I'm going to remove SkyTracer because I no longer need that renderer there. It's going to ask me if it should remove the sunlight that it had added for SkyTracer. And we'll say yes because we don't need it anymore, so it's baked in. And then finally, what we're going to do, because the butterflies are such small scale, the clouds here should be sort of out of focus. So rather than using expensive depth of field, what we can do is we'll just go into the image editor here, and I'm going to go into the different skies, and you can see how it's rendered. You can see it's kind of cool to look at the different images that it actually generated just by selecting these here. And let's go ahead and choose the one called Front. We can see that that's actually the one we're looking at right here. You can see that. There's the little loop there. So what I want to do is, on the front image, I'm going to go to Processing, and I'm going to choose a filter called Full Precision Blur. You can see it blurs it, and you notice now it kind of goes out of focus. We can increase the blur by double-clicking on it, changing the value. Let's set that to 14 by 14, and you notice that that actually sort of spreads out the blur a little more. So now we have those nice sort of out-of-focus clouds in the backdrop, and we can see as we move around here, it's all set up. All right, let's go ahead and render this out. You can see I've added a few more of the butterflies. Pretty simple to do, using the load from scene, using the same technique I showed you for changing scale of motion, changing the position of the motion. We've also got a little motion blur added on there so that the wings flapping look really nice. And again, you can see very quickly we're able to create some pretty cool animation using LightWave 3D. The next project we're going to work on is going to show us a little bit more about how to do deformations on an object. This time we're going to use a technology called bones. And bones allow us to deform the skin of a character just like our actual bones do under our skin. We're also going to take a look at a technology called subdivision surfaces. This is a way that we can smooth out our geometry at the time of the render. Let's go ahead and take a look. Alright, so what we're going to create is this animation here where you can see our little severed hand scurrying across the ground. And obviously we need to have some pretty precise control over those fingers, and to do that we're going to be animating bones. So first of all, we need to take a look at how we create bones and put those into the skin. So we need to go ahead and work with a character hand. Let's go ahead and take a look here inside of LightWave. We're going to move from layout into modeler. So we'll click on the modeler button here. And let's load an object. Go to load object requester. Inside of your objects directory, there's a characters directory, and inside there you'll find a character called stu_full character. Alright, let's bring him in there. Now again, this isn't a modeling tape, so we're just going to quickly show you how to basically cut off Stu's hand. Now, hit the A key and that will auto-fit the character into your window there. Earlier we were working in Modeler and we had turned on symmetry, so we want to disable that. And we want to change our mode back to mouse center. Okay, now if we just want to work on this hand here, so what we can do is put your mouse right over the wrist, hit the G key, which tells it to go to center, and then zoom in a little bit with the viewport here. Alright, there we go. Make sure you're in polygon select mode, and use your right mouse key to select all the polygons back to the wrist here. And then we'll simply use our cut option here, and you can see we've just whacked off the arm. So what we want to do now is create a new object. So we'll say new object and then hit paste. So now we have a new object with this in there. Now just to make sure we don't screw up our original Stu object, let's go back to Stu here and just close him. We'll say close object and tell it do not save changes. We don't want to save Stu with his arm missing. Alright, we just need to borrow his arm. Okay, so there we are, we've got the hand. Now you can see if you look at it in our perspective view here, it's a little bit chunky. Alright, it looks kind of rough. That's because this guy is set up as what we call a subdivision surface model. This is the polygon cage. If you push the tab key on your keyboard, you'll see the character's hand smooths out. Now on your screen you might see some little blue dotted lines. Those are what we call cages. I just have those deactivated. If you want to deactivate yours, hit the D key on your keyboard. Under layout, you'll see an option for show cages. You can see if I turn mine on, this is probably what you might see here. You can turn those off. You might also have guides on. You can see those there. You can disable those as well. I like to have those turned off just so I can have a nice clean view of my skin there. Okay, now there's another thing you can see very carefully if you look. There's some little white lines in there. Those are what we call skelegons. And we're not going to go extensively into creating of skelegons, but I'm going to show you what those look like inside the character. Hit the W key on your keyboard, and if you go down to a third of the way down, you'll see a skelegons listing. It shows there are 21. Click on the little plus next to the skelegons listing, and you'll see, if we close that window there, you can see now in our perspective view, it's got all of the skelegons selected. All right? These are basically little 2-point polygons that define the bones that are going to go into the character. And inside of Modeler, you can basically just draw these out using the Create Skelegons. You'll see that under Create, and then down here under Elements, you'll see Skelegons. Okay, that's a pretty complicated task, and there's an entire tape available for doing setup of characters. If you're interested in setting those up, you can check that out. Okay, so here we have the Skelegons in the arm. Now, one thing we want to do is we want to cap off the arm here, because as you can see, it's got a hole in the backside. So let's go ahead and click anywhere in one of these blank areas on the side, like over here where it says Elements. That will deselect all of those polygons or skelegons. Now let's move our viewport over a little bit, and we want to go into Point Select mode. You'll find that down here at the bottom. Right mouse lasso all the points on the end cap there. You should have 9 points selected. Okay. go ahead and hit copy. Choose the second layer at the top of your interface up here and hit paste. All right, now if we look in the right-hand view here, you can see all the points just pasted back in there. We know that this point here right in the middle is from a skeleton, so we don't need that. Let's delete it. Just by clicking right on top of it, that selects it, and then you can just hit cut. Now what we need is to create 3 little 4-sided polygons here to make the end cap. So just follow with me here. Select these points in this order. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hit the P key. That creates 1 polygon. Then go to the next 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hit the P key again. That creates our next polygon. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 creates the bottom. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our polygons here. I've got them selected. You can see if we look in the top left-hand viewport, the lines coming off the edge here pointing inward. Those are the surface normals. That shows us which direction they're facing. If we put the first layer in the background, which we can do by clicking on the bottom half of that layer icon, you can see that they're actually facing into the arm. Okay? We want them to face outward, so that's the end cap. Simply hit the F key on your keyboard for flip. That flips those polygons. Then finally we want to make these into subdivision surfaces, so we hit the tab key as well here, and that smooths them out. So now you can see here in the perspective view, that's going to cap that nicely. So what we need to do here is hit the X key for cut, go to the first layer, and hit the V key for paste. And now you can see that's right in there. Now you notice it's not very smooth. Let me just zoom in there a little bit. I'm just going to rotate this around and zoom in. That's because these points are doubled up. In other words, we copied these polygons and pasted them, so they're sharing multiple points here. To fix that, simply hit the M key for merge and say OK. And you'll notice now that's been smoothed off. Now, if for some reason your polygons are a different color, what you can do is just select them just by clicking and painting them over this way. They might be the default white. To change that, just hit the Q key on your keyboard, and that will bring up your Change Surface Requester. Choose from this list, choose the skin, all right, and then you say OK, and you have that nice perfect blue so it matches the rest of the arm. Okay, let's go ahead and deselect those polygons. You can do that just by clicking and painting over them this way. And hit the A key on your keyboard so we can fit the arm. And we can see as the arm is oriented improperly, all right, we want the arm or the hand to lay down on the floor. So to do that, we're going to go to our Rotate tool, which is under Modify, Rotate, or just like Layout, you can hit the Y key. We're going to go into the right view here, click right in the middle of the hand, and drag to the left. And that just rotates it right over. And now you can see in our perspective view how that's somewhat laying on the floor there. All right, we'll go to the back view here. Let's raise that up just a little bit. The T key changes us to move. We can move it up a little bit so that the back of the wrist is sort of laying on the ground. And then go to your Y key again. Put your mouse pointer right there on the wrist and just roll it down a little bit. Now, next thing we need to do is we want to make sure that the pivot point for the object is right somewhere in the center here. Now, we showed you earlier how we can use the center of the world position inside of Modeler to create the pivot point. You can also go in and just define the pivot point explicitly by using the pivot tool. So let's take a look at how we do that. Okay, first of all, let's just zoom out a little bit here. And you can see where the black lines are. That's the actual center of the world. So what I want to do is I actually want to have the root of the arm centered up there. So I'm going to use my T key to move. I'm just going to move this right over here like that. And now I've got that matched up sort of on the 0, 0 plane. All right, so typically it would rotate around the back of the wrist. What I actually want it to do is I want the pivot point to be more around the wrist point here rather than at the elbow joint. I want it to be at the wrist. So we're going to go to our pivot tool, and I can just grab this little point here and move it over, and that now represents where it's going to rotate around. Again, normally without the pivot tool active, it would just rotate around 0, 0, 0, which is down here, but now it's going to rotate around this point. The reason I've moved this arm back to stationary 0 is so that when I load it in, it's still rooted at the 0 point, but it'll rotate around this location. Okay, let's go ahead and save the object. We'll call it Severed Hand, and we'll just save it in the root. Okay, great. And now we'll tell it to send object to layout. That's up here in the top right. And now we can see there's our hand located right in the middle of our world. So we're going to go ahead and choose our camera here and move the camera over. and up. Again, right mouse key for moving up and down, left mouse key for moving on X and Z. And we'll go ahead and rotate that a little bit. Great. Let's go ahead and go into the perspective view here. And you can see one thing. You'll notice that you don't see the skelegons any longer. All right, the skelegons are no longer visible. That's because inside of layout, LightWave doesn't consider skelegons unless we convert them into bones. Skelegons are just simple placeholders that get transformed into bones, and then the bones are what does the work. Before we show you how to do that, I'm going to show you how you can put in just some simple bones into the arm for deformation. Earlier we looked at using endomorphs to deform the butterflies. And by doing that, what we've done is actually explicitly stated which points in the model could move and where they could move to. Then we use sliders inside of layout to animate those values. Well, bones are a little bit more flexible, no pun intended, but they allow you to actually go in and they're sort of like sticks with magnetic influence. And as you put them in there, each bone looks around itself and sees which points are closest to it, and those are the points that it will affect the most. So the more bones you have in an object, the more control you can have. There are also some settings we can add or change to change the way the influence falls off. Let's go ahead and take a look at a very simple example of placing a couple bones in the model, and you can see how that deforms. So to do that, we're going to go to our top view here. And now what I want to do is I want to draw some bones into the character. So layout has some tools for that. Let's go ahead and go into bones mode here. That just sets the current item to bones. You'll notice it says current item none because we haven't added any bones yet. We'll go up to our items tab here, and then we'll go to add. Now if we just say add bone, it's going to add a bone that's, you'll actually ask us for a name first. We can type in whatever we want, or we can just say OK. And you can see it's going to add that bone in aligned to the z-axis. All bones are always going to be loaded in aligned to the z-axis. What we want is we want the bones to come in this way. So I could add a bone, then rotate it, but I can also use draw bones, which is a little easier. Let's go ahead and clear the bone. To do that, we hit the minus key, and it asks if we're sure. We say yes, and it's gone. Now let's go ahead and add a bone under Add, Bones, Draw Bones. All right, and now I can click at the base of the arm here and just drag this out. All right, you can see it's coming just a little bit behind, so we're going to go to the Move tool here and move the base. Oops. Okay, here's a good tip. You'll notice that I was still in Draw Bones, so as I've continued to click down here, it's drawing more bones. What I need to do is go ahead and change that to a different tool, so I can now remove that. We'll say minus. So if that happens when you're drawing bones, just go change tools, then come back to it, and drawing will be inactive. Okay, so now I've got one bone here, and then we'll go to Add, Bones, and we'll just tell it to add a child bone, which is going to add another bone right on the tip here. So we'll say OK, and now you can see I've got the two bones. All right, we're going to go back to the base bone. We're going to move that forward, and I didn't create a key earlier. And you'll notice that I also have turned off my auto key mode down here if we look at the bottom of the screen. So that's another thing to be wary of. If you don't have this turned on and you move things around and you don't create a key, the next time you go to select something else or you go to move something else, you're going to notice that your bones have moved back to their original position because there is no keyframe for it. All right, so if that happens, just remember, move your bones. You can actually see this little visual indicator that tells me my keyframe hasn't been updated. It's still located right here. If I hit Create Key, you see that little dot goes away, and now my bones are locked into the object. We can zoom over here a little bit, and you can see there are my two bones right there. All right, now you'll notice if you look closely that they're sort of dotted lines. That means they are inactive. So I'm going to hit the R key on the keyboard, which rests the bones. Okay, and then I hit the next bone with the up arrow key and rest that. And now you can see they're both intact and they're live and ready to go. If I take the first bone and I rotate it around, you see it rotates both bones and the entire arm moves. If I take the second bone, you can see how it's actually got an area of influence. And it sort of creates a strange squishy effect, as if I've got kind of a rubberized hand, and the bone is actually deforming all the points around it. And you can see the sort of fall off that happens where this bone is controlling all these points in kind of a capsule area, and this bone is controlling the points on the top in somewhat of a capsule influence. All right? Okay. So that's generically how bones work. Now you can get the idea that the more bones you put into the arm, the more control you're going to have because they'll each be fighting for their own little area of influence. All right. Now, I mentioned earlier that this object is a subdivision surface model, which means we can change the amount of smoothness that occurs in the skin. To do that, I want you to select Objects Mode again, and you'll see the bounding box around the entire arm if you have that active. Now hit the Item Properties option down here, or the P key on your keyboard, and you can see in the middle here it's got two different settings for subdivision surfaces. One is the display subpatch level, one is the render subpatch level. There's also an option above that called subdivision order, and right now it's set to first. What this means is I'm going to go ahead and change the display subpatch level so you can see what happens when we increase or decrease that number. Let's just set that down to 0. You'll see now the object has become very rough. If we move over a little bit, you can see how the fingers are no longer smooth. They look like they did in Modeler when it was still polygons. That's because there's now no subdivision happening to the geometry. If we set this up to a level of 2, you can see how it now starts to smooth that out. If we set it up to, say, a level of 4, you'll see now it becomes very smooth. In fact, if we change our viewport to wireframe mode, okay, you can see a very dense mesh here. If we go back to a setting of 1 or 0, you'll see it's now very light. So this is what subdivision surface allows us to do. It's actually going to create more geometry, and every time it creates another level of polygons, it actually smooths it out to make it a very continuous mesh. It's very good for organic surfaces. Now the other setting we talked about is the render display. Okay, so we've got the display setting, which allows us to change what we see inside of the real-time view. The render setting allows us to change what we're going to see at the time of final render. This is very important because you might want to have a very low setting, like a setting of 1, so that when you animate it's very fast, but then a very high setting, like 3 or 4, at the time of rendering, so that your final image is very smooth and looks nice. The other setting we saw on there was the subdivision order, which means when does it subdivide from that low-res mesh into the high-res mesh. In this case, it's set to first, which means the first thing it does is subdivides the model, and then it applies motions, it applies bones, so on and so forth. If we change that to a later setting, if I say last, it will actually do the deformation of the skin and then do the subdivision of the surface. All right, let's take a look at how that will affect it. Let's move our little viewport over here a little bit. And let's go ahead and turn on Auto Key Adjust. That's right down here at the bottom of your screen. And we'll go ahead and select our bones here. And let's just rotate this along. Now you can see we've got our bone selected. And we've got a little keyframe set now. Let's go ahead and select the object again. And you can see when I change, watch when I change the subdivision order from first to last. Watch how the skinning changes a little bit. Okay? You see how it gets a little bit more smooth in here? This little curve? That's because rather than creating the geometry, and in fact if we turn this up a little bit, let's set this to a setting of 3. Oops, not 13. That's going to be incredibly high. You can see it just changed my polygon count up to 84,000 polygons. Want to be careful there. So we'll set that back to 3. And now you can see it's back down to 4,500 polygons. That's reasonable. Let's go ahead and set the maximum render level back to texture shaded. All right, and now we're going to watch the difference between first and last in our subdivision. So we've got first here, which means it subdivides the surface and then the bones are applied. We're changing it to last, which means it deforms the low-res cage and then does the subdivision. All right, and that's actually going to be your best solution for working with things like bones and endomorphs when you're working with subdivision surfaces. When we show you having lots more bones in the hand, it'll become a lot clearer why that's important. And we'll take a look at that again in a moment. All right, let's go ahead and remove these bones and take a look at the skelegons that are in the object. So we're going to select the bone there, hit the minus key, say yes, we want to clear that, and yes, clear its descendants as well, which is the other bone. And voila, I'm back to my original hand there. We rotate around, you can see there are no bones in the hand. So what we're going to do now is choose the object. I've just done that by clicking on it, or you can choose Objects Mode. Go back to your Add pop-up, go to Add Bones, Convert Skelegons into Bones. So you remember all those skelegons we had in the model. If we say Convert to Bones, it just told us 21 bones were created, and now you can see these little blue lines that represent, inside there, the bones that have been created from the skelegons. If we change our maximum render level to bounding box, you can see, yep, there are those bones that were created from the placement of those skelegons, and you can select those just by clicking on them. If we go back into our solid shaded mode, you can see if we grab one of these guys and we click on the pitch rotator, you can actually bend it, and you'll notice you get a nice bending finger. And there we go. All right. Now you notice it kind of pinches a little bit, And we're going to show you how we can fix some of this deformation problem with bones here in just a sec. All right, let's go ahead and move our viewport over a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and roll our viewport around a little bit as well. And I'm going to show you something here that's a little uncomfortable. You can see that I still have all 3 rotation discs active on my hand here. So that means I can pitch, which is fine. If I click on the green line, pitch is good. I can heading. That's also okay for a finger, although you really don't want to be able to go that far. But what you don't want to be able to do is things like bank. And a lot of times you want to have precise control over a joint, but you don't necessarily need to have all 3 axes active. What I can do, if we look at the bottom left of our screen here, you'll see where I have the rotation options. These are our numeric controls. It shows heading, pitch, and bank. I can turn off heading and bank altogether. Now if we go back and we look at our bone, you'll see our rotation discs, the red and blue rotation discs, are now dotted lines, which means they're inactive. So if I try and rotate on heading, I can't do it. If I try and rotate on bank, I can't do it. All I can do is pitch the bone. All right? So in some cases, you might want to go ahead and go through and deactivate the different axes of rotation or the different directions of motion right down here in the bottom left of your screen. All right, for now, we're just going to leave those back on. So we'll activate all those guys, and we'll make sure this guy is reset to his original rotation. All right, now what we want to do is take a look at some of the bone options for deformation. So if we go ahead and click and drag on this pitch, again, you can see how we get that weird pinching effect right there in the joint. So we're going to go to the bone's properties. Hit the P key on your keyboard, or hit the item properties at the bottom of your screen. And you can see several things here. First of all, we want to look at the fall-off type. We see that up at the top here. The fall-off type right now is set to inverse distance at 16. All right, we're going to go ahead and set that to 64, which just changes how quickly it falls off from one bone to the next. Basically, each bone, as I mentioned earlier, has if you think of the bone here of my forearm, there's an area of influence. It's sort of like a capsule effect. And from the bone, it starts to fall off over distance. Setting that number up higher means it has a shorter fall-off range. It falls off more sharply and more quickly. So by setting that up, for example, when you've got fingers and things like that, if you have a broad fall-off range, a bone in this finger might start to spill over and affect this one a little bit. By setting it up higher, it sort of contains the influence of each bone a little bit more directly. Okay, so setting of 64 is pretty good for this hand. Now we can also see, if we zoom in here on that joint, that the joint looks pretty bad. Okay, it pinches like a garden hose. So if we go down here, you can see there are options for joint compensation and options for muscle flexing. So if we turn these on, see the joint compensation and compensation for its parent, which is here, you see that gives us a much nicer looking pinch on the finger. If we turn those off, you can see again how nasty it looks. And that looks great. Muscle flexing, we turn that on, you see it starts to push out a little bit here. Muscle flexing there gives you a little bit more fullness in there. All right, and these all have percentage sliders, so if you want to, you can actually sort of monkey around with percentages here. You can see you really want it to, to flex out a whole bunch. You can turn this up to like 500. And you see how that starts to really push out the finger pad. If we set that back down to 100, you see it sort of pulls back in a little bit. Now, obviously setting up all these options for every single bone can be time consuming. All right, you may not want to have to go in, choose a bone, turn all those on, choose the next bone, turn all those on. So I'm going to show you how we can do that to all the bones at the same time. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our spreadsheet editor. This is exactly what the spreadsheet was designed for. Okay, so if we take a look at our spreadsheet here, you can see it shows you all the different bones in the object. All right, and then over here we have various different options we can choose from. In this case, we want to choose the bone properties effect out of this pop-up. And now you can see it shows us joint compensation, parent joint compensation, muscle flexing, and parent muscle flexing. Those are the settings we just set on the one bone. Well, now we can come in here, and I can select every single cell in the object and just double-click on one, and that has now set that attribute for every single bone in the hand. I come in here, select these guys, do the same thing, double-click, shift-click selects the row, double-click activates the option. Now if I tell it to apply, I make sure it's applied to the bones. Now if I come back out here and I go into this item's properties, you can see, yep, there it is. And in fact, if I choose any bone in the hand, you'll see it's got all these already turned on, so I don't have to worry about it. That's a real time saver. rather than having to go through and select each bone and activate those options, you can now do that in the spreadsheet editor. All right, let's go ahead and go back here and reset our rotation on that finger. And now what we need to do is actually do the animation of the hand. I'm going to zoom out, go back to our camera view. And we can see there's our hand there. Let's go ahead and move our camera up a little bit. We'll choose cameras, choose the move option, rotate a little bit. Okay, that's pretty good. We want the hand to start over here and just sort of crawl across. So before we get started on that, let's go ahead and go back into our perspective, and we're going to choose these bones here on each one of the fingers so that we can start. What we want to do is create this sort of motion where it's actually crawling across this way across the table. So to do that, we're going to use forward kinematics, which means we're directly affecting each bone by selecting them, but we're going to animate them all at the same time. All right? And to do that, we can actually multi-select these items inside of Layout. So if I sort of tumble my viewport around here a little bit, get to the top, you can see I can just click on the bones, hold down my Shift key, and that allows me to select them just like this. Okay, not too bad. And now you can see the rotation discs for all of them. So if you click on any one of the green discs, it's going to rotate those around. You see you can make a fist very quickly. All right, that allows you to just move those very, very easily. Now, even though it's pretty simple to select those things, if I know I'm going to have to come back to these selections often, I may want to create what's called a selection set, a favorite set. So I'm going to go to my scene editor here, the top left, and you can see if we look at our scene editor, it's got all those bones selected, the left pinky fingers, the left ring finger, left middle finger, left index fingers, all 3 bones in each one of those 4 fingers. At the top here, you can see where it says favorites. I'm going to tell it to create set, and we'll call this all fingers. All right? That way, if at any point you come in here and you accidentally deselect everything, you can always go right back to your favorites pop-up, choose all fingers, and boom, it selects them for you automatically. All right? This is a great way to save some time. If you know there are specific areas of your character you're going to be working on, you can just create a favorite set and then get to that right there on the scene editor. All right, let's go ahead and create the animation of the fingers crawling across the table. So to do that, as I mentioned, we know we want the fingers to sort of curl up, rotate around, and then reach back out so they can run right across the table there. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start by curling that over. So we'll use our pitch control to roll it up. And actually, we need to change our time slider first. So we're going to undo that. So we want it to happen over about 10 frames. And we can just sort of roll out here. So we've got our time slider at 10. You can pitch this down and under. All right, I'll create a key there. Now I know that I want the fingers to stay curled as they roll, as the back of the fingers roll up. So it rolls down this way. Then we want it to stay curled as the top knuckles roll up and then reach out. So to do that, what I need to do is deselect all the tip bones. So I'm just going to hold down my control key in the scene editor, deselect these guys. All right, and you can see in my perspective that leaves me with just these bones here selected. So we'll go ahead and go to frame 15, and we're going to pitch these up like that, and a little further maybe. And we'll create a key there. And then we're going to go out to frame 20. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to go back to frame 0. And we're going to create a key from here to frame 25. All right, and now you can see there are bones reaching out. All right, and we actually need to select all the hand. So again, we go back to our 0 keyframe. We're going to employ our favorite set, all fingers, create a key, 25, and let's just deselect those so we can see it now, and there it is. Okay, so you see it starts off, curls under, reaches out, back to flat. Now the next thing we need to do is actually have that be a repeating motion. And we know we can set a post behavior inside of the graph editor for a channel, but in this case we need to set it for all channels on all the fingers. So how are we going to do that? Well, we certainly don't want to do it one at a time, so let's take a look. Let's go back to our favorite sets here. We'll say select all fingers. Now we're going to open up our graph editor. And by default, the graph editor will bring in the last selected object's channels. So you can see here we have all the channels for one of the fingers. Well, a little known fact is if you have things selected in layout, if you hold down the Shift key in Graph Editor and hit the G key, which is Get, it will get all the channels for every single bone. So now you can see here all the channels X, Y, Z, HPB, and scale for every single bone that's selected. So that's a really good trick. We're just going to come in here, select all of them, like this, and we're going to set the post behavior to repeat and the pre behavior to repeat. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select all the first keyframes, and we're going to use ease in, ease out, and we're going to select all the keyframes at 25 and ease in, ease out, which makes a nice smooth curve in between. We close our graph editor, select our object, and hit play. And now you can see there's the finger reaching out. And it's a 25 frame reach, so that means it's going to loop at 50. So we'll just set that to 50. And now you can see the fingers are looping. Now you'll notice that right now we've got the nice motion of the fingers doing like this to reach out and pull, but they're not alternating. To make the fingers really crawl across, each finger needs to reach out, pull, reach out, pull, reach out, pull. Right now we just have sort of a waving effect. So to change the timing, we can use, as we've seen before, the spreadsheet editor's dope view. Let's take a look. So come back out here. Let's just go ahead and turn this up to say 100 and, let's just go 100 frames. It'll still create a nice loop. Okay, and then we go to spreadsheet again. And this time, again, we don't need to work on these properties, so we can collapse that right down here with this little arrow key. Then we expand the dope sheet view, and there you can see our emotions. All right, so we're going to go ahead and select all these. One of the things we want to do, first of all, is just change the timing. So let's go ahead and move our viewport here so we can actually see the fingers as we work on the spreadsheet. So let's take these guys here, and actually let's take the next set. We just hold down Shift, we select those, and we just shift them forward a little bit in time. So now you can see the pinky there is happening a little bit off timing, and we'll select all these guys here, slide them forward. Now I've got two of them moving, and then we're going to go ahead and get access to this last three here, and we shift those forward in time as well. And now you have your fingers doing that nice rotation with the nice offset. So that's pretty cool. Now it's got the little horse gallop on the fingers. Now if you want, and we want to speed those up perhaps, we can come back here, we'll zoom out a little bit. And remember, we can just go ahead and select all these guys. I'm holding down my control key to add these into the selection. And I can speed them up by scaling. Rather than moving them or shifting them in time, we can just scale them in time. And see, now you can see they're actually moving much more quickly. That's kind of a cool look. A nice little horse gallop. So we'll close that up. And the next thing we'll do is go to our camera view here. And you can see that the fingers are actually sort of going down below the ground. All right? If we go to the front view, you can do that with the pop-up. You can see how these are dipped down below the ground. So we're going to go ahead and go to the first frame here and move this up. And let's rotate it a little bit. Go ahead and zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. And again, you can see that's where we set our pivot point earlier. So we're going to rotate this like this and move it back down a little bit so it gets close there. Now let's take a look at the fingers. They're still going a little bit low, so what we're going to do is I'm going to use this as my reference point. I know I need to move it up about like that, and need to rotate it around a little bit more so that the arm is kind of dragging. All right, that's pretty good. And now we'll just create a key for that at frame 0. All right, so now you can see the fingers actually kind of come down. They dip through just a little bit, but that's okay. All right, and now what we want to do is go to our camera view and go to the last frame in the animation and just move this across as such. Create a key and then push play, and you can see now the hand dragging itself across the ground. All right, so now before we render that, of course, we need a ground plane. And just like we've done many times before now, we're going to use the plus key. Go in and choose the age-old landscape ground object. And we know what's going to happen, right? It's going to change our grid size. Don't freak out. Just reduce your grid size, and everything's OK. Again, I'm using the open bracket to reduce the grid size back down to a reasonable amount. And there we go. All right. And, of course, we can tweak with that a little bit if we want to move the ground plane down just a little bit so we can actually get the fingers to not be pushing through the ground quite so much. We'll change that. And what we want to do also is change the light here. If we go to our perspective view, I'm going to zoom out. And we see our light there. Again, our grid size is a little strange, so change our grid size. And then zoom back in. And there's our light. So we're going to change our light to a spotlight so it's a little more eerie. Again, P for properties. Change your light type to spot. And then, in fact, in this case, let's not use a spotlight. We've done that before. Let's use a point light. Let's use a point light, and let's go to our back view here. Let's move it right up here like this, just above the object. And you can see how the point light has that nice radial effect on it. And then let's go ahead and set it right about here. We can go to perspective view, rotate around, set it right up above there. That's pretty good. And then let's go ahead and turn on ray trace shadows. All right, and we go to our camera view, the 6 key there, and then go to your render options, activate render display. Let's take a look at a frame here. And you can see, yep, there's our hand. You get the nice fall off on the light effect there. Get the ground plane. And now all we have to do is add some motion blur and render out our final animation. And there we can see our little guy with the motion blur, fingers crawling across. Pretty cool look. Again, very quick and easy using bones to do the deformation, using subdivision surfaces so that it smooths out the surface after the deformation. Again, remember we have our subdivision surface setting set to last, so it does the bones deformation on the low res points and then smooths those out. And of course, by changing the bones influence settings, adding some muscle flexing, some joint compensation, you get those really nice looking joints on the fingers. All right, the hand object is really a great object for familiarizing yourself with bones. So make sure you play around with that. Try things like selecting the bones. Use the squash and stretch tool on bones. You get some really cool sort of telescoping bone effects. You can do all kinds of stuff. You're not just limited to rotating bones. You can move them around. And remember, you're not limited by the laws of traditional anatomy. You can go in and create all kinds of wacky effects. So your arms can squash and stretch and do all kinds of cool stuff. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've been looking at how to change the timing of your motions. We've showed you endomorphs, how to use bones, lots of different deformation options, some more in-depth animation tools in LightWave. As you can see, LightWave 3D is incredibly deep in terms of animation. We're going to be taking a look at a lot more of those things in subsequent tapes, so make sure you keep your eyes open for that. Until next time, keep on rendering.